at me for forgetting to.
Exactly. It's fine.
But, we're all doing this as part of all the other things that we're doing in our lives, right? So, we start off with the short stories and with an anthology, and that way we get to find people who, they kind of write in between the lines. They write great stories, or there's great bones to the stories they're submitting, and they're willing to work with us in taking those bones and really creating something beautiful, right? And identifying those either hidden gems. So, and I don't want to say those overnight successes, because the reality is, I think everybody who has sent us anything has been writing for at least 5 years that we've published, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So no one is anywhere close to being an overnight success, but this may actually be their first published, in paper, published piece.
Okay.
So anyway, so the bones of it is more okay, the publishing house, and then at some point, we may augment it with, instruction, workshops, that kind of thing, again, to kind of help with the base operational costs. And then we're also exploring doing online comic books. So, the kind that you click on it and then it's interactive, that kind of, so yeah, okay. Because we've had quite a few stories that would translate really well into graphic novels. So we wanted to publish them both in your classic standard, paperback form and ebook form, as well as in an online graphic novel format. So, okay. So I don't even know if I answered your question, because I kind of just rambled on forever, but there you go.
Yeah, of course you did. So I'm interested in hearing about your business model versus, let's say, the Amazons of the world, because obviously Amazon now is the big behemoth, mm-hmm. and I talk to a fair number of people who are in the self-publishing industry, and they're like, don't go through you don't need to go through a publishing press. Amazon will do all that stuff for you, and I'm sure there's pros and cons for each of those. But how do you, as a smaller press, how do you approach and think about the connection between what you're doing and then Amazon? And is that something that you're necessarily worried about, or is it just because you have your particular niche and you're going to be the best at it and not worry about what Amazon's doing with their taking over the world thing?
That's a great question. So, I'm not worried about it, but not for any of the reasons that you said, although they were all fascinating.
Sure.
So, I think every writer has to make their own personal choice, right?
Okay.
And decide what is best for them. And, what I consider to be great writing and what I consider to be a great story, someone else may not, mm-hmm. right? That's just truth, right? I know I'm friends with several people who've published on Amazon. Just to experiment, years ago, I published one of my short stories, which is, I wrote in the vein of 1,000 Years of Solitude.
Okay.
And I published it on Amazon, just to see, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's fine. If you are a business writer, publishing on Amazon probably makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
The reason for that is you already have a platform, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you are a business writer, so you're writing the next, of course I'm going to mind blank. I'm sitting here in my office staring at books, and not a single darn one of them is a business book right now. Isn't that hilarious? And I read all of them too. That's horrible.
Well, also, right, sit next to me is Ray Dalio's Life and Work Principles, which is just Ray Dalio is he's a big hedge fund guy who's basically the hedge fund guy, and he wrote a book about his principles and business philosophies. Is that kind of I don't want to say business card book, but is it more of a business card book you're talking about?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
So let's use him.
Okay.
Let's pretend he published on Amazon, right?
Mm-hmm.
He probably already has podcasts and a blog and speaks at conferences, and his job is to consult others on approaches to hedge funds, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's his day job. He has a very natural platform to publish on Amazon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because he can sell it when he's going to conferences. He can sell it anywhere, basically, wherever he's physically going to go. If you are a nonfiction writer or a fiction writer, and I'm going to clarify nonfiction for a sec.
Sure.
I mean like memoir or creative nonfiction, and any kind of fiction writer, you don't have that platform necessarily, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's unusual that you do.
Yeah.
I mean, I wrote a blog for a couple of years, and I got to know a lot of other writers that way, because at the time, I mean, it was kind of masturbatory, because we were all just sitting around talking about, our writing lives and how, brilliant we are and how fabulous it is that we did whatever, right?
Right.
And some of them actually went on to be, I mean, they're huge best-selling novelists now, right? So I'm allowed to call them masturbatory because I just called myself that too.
Sure.
But so so we were trying to build platforms. I mean, that was the bottom line, right? But we weren't doing it right. And most fiction and nonfiction writers and are doing it wrong. The reason is that their audience is themselves. So if their real intent was to sit down and start a writers conference, then great, write a book about how to start a writers conference. If your real intent is to get readers, there's an assumption in that approach that all writers are readers, or all readers are writers, and that's not true. A lot of readers are not writers, right? R-I-G-H-T, not W-R-I-T. So,
right. Well, so, probably that true as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So with that assumption, right, they're not actually building a fan base, right? They're basically building a community of people like them, which is fine, right? But it's not building a platform.
Okay. Right.
So, as you can tell, I've taught classes on building your own brand. So, yeah. So if you're more on the business side, Amazon's a great choice, right? And if you really are, or if you're really proliferate and you write constantly, right? And you're amazing at networking, and you can pop out a story like a month, right? Amazon is the place for you because you write so frequently, and because you are so social, right? Which is, you're a very social animal, and you're out there and you're talking to tons of people, blah, blah, blah. Amazon, dead spot on, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
If you are not that person, then most likely you're probably going to seek out a small press or some type of publishing house to represent you. Because the reality is, and I was actually calculating it this morning because I have way too much time on my hands, which is a lie, to publish a book and do, and I mean, pretty inexpensively, right? Where you're using volunteers, and it's going to cost you somewhere around per book $2,500 to $4,500 per book. Okay. So you need to try and recoup that $2,500 to $4,500 yourself. So let's think about that, right? The reality is that even with publishing on Amazon, you're only going to make a couple bucks per book, right? So if you do that, you're putting out, and that's on the low side, $2,500 to $4,500. That's on the low side.
Yeah.
Most people are going to probably spend closer to $10,000 to $20,000 per book, if they do it on their own.
Okay.
So if you go with a press, we're not only investing, financially, we're investing in terms of helping that writer grow, right? And helping them understand that, they're not writing for a blog anymore. They're not writing for their writers. They're actually writing for an audience. and get them to think more in that capacity, right? Because it doesn't matter how clever you are or how brilliant your concept is or how you rewrote the Bible so that it's now in 2025. No one cares unless that story kicks ass, right? Right. So, again, I think there's room for everything, for the big houses, for the small presses, and for the Amazons. I think it's just that you, as the person who's creating that product, you have to be real with yourself. What is it that you are creating, and what is your purpose? Is your purpose to make a bunch of money? Is your purpose to get your story out there? Is your purpose that, you want to, it's to augment a larger business that you already have, right? There's room for everybody. So, they should go for it if they want to use Amazon. Don't call me. I'm not going to edit it for you.
So I actually, that brings up my next question on yours. In your press, so you said you have some open calls for submissions, but are you actively looking for new writers and new stories out there? And then with that, do you work with them then to launch everything? Are you giving them, an advance part of that? Is that how your business model works, or how does your system work?
So I'm going to tell you some stuff that's slightly controversial, even within the press, so you know. So we don't really do open calls, so we do have a submittable page, right? Okay. Which most presses, well, I can't say that that's absolutely true, but yeah, so we have a submittable page. And on there, we have it where you can submit novels, novellas, nonfiction, narrative poems, and 2 that are open. And none of them are not open. Let me put it that way. They're all open, I guess. We don't advertise it really. Yeah. The reason that we don't really advertise it, and this is the part that'll be controversial, is because we're small. And from being in this industry for years, I know that it's way too easy to push out a story and go, oh my gosh, it's brilliant. Like, you knock it out at midnight, you wake up at 10 a.m. the next day or whatever, and you're like, it's still brilliant. And you send it somewhere, right? Okay, so now let's expand that to like hundreds, if not thousands, if not a million people who all want to be writers or who are all writers in some capacity. Yeah. We're all of 6 people. There is no freaking way that we have the time to go through that kind of volume of open submissions, right? Now, even within the press, I mean, this is me being a dictator. Even within the press, we have people who completely disagree with me on that. We should have advertisements, or we should be listed in like every known writer's website, and anyone should be able to find us, and all that kind of stuff. And I won't do it. I will let different well-known conferences know when we have open calls for like the short story anthology, which is annual, the novella anthology, which is annual. And I will let them know that we do quietly take novels, novellas, and nonfiction and narrative poems on an ongoing basis. But we don't openly advertise it for all the reasons I just said. Now, when we accept a piece, so that was kind of like, I think, the part 2 of your question. So we go through and we're like, this is wonderful, or hey, this is really good. It could use some editing, or I'd love to collaborate with this writer on making this something that would be really beautiful, right? Yeah. What we do, if it's a part of an anthology, they're paid, right? And we only option first rights. We don't option anything else, right? And that it's a more of a, I call it the email agreement, right? Because in reality, email is a binding contract, whether people realize it or not. But
right, it totally is.
Yeah. So I, just send them a note and say, hey, we'd love to publish your story, and or the press does. It's usually me, though, in all honesty. We'd love to publish your story, and with that, we'll pay you X amount, and I just need to know that you are willing to collaborate with the editor, right? And the reason for that too is some writers, it's not frequent. It's definitely a very, very small group